In the next 18 months, nearly 1 million homeowners across the UK will get a single letter, one envelope, one number. And for hundreds of thousands of families, that number will decide whether they stay in their home or walk away from it. Because what's happening right now isn't a slowdown. It's a split, a fault line running straight through the UK housing market. In the North Manchester, Leeds, Newcastle homes are selling in days, prices rising nearly 8% in a year, bidding wars erupting like it's 2016 again. But down south, London is stalling, listings piling up, sellers cutting prices they swore they'd never touch. A £180,000 home in Newcastle is now competing with a £450,000 equivalent in outer London, and buyers are finally asking the question no one dared ask a decade ago. Is living in the South even worth it anymore? And behind this divide is a ticking clock, the fixed-rate mortgage cliff. 800,000 households rolling off 2% deals, straight into 5, 6, sometimes 7%. For many, that's an extra £300 to £600 a month every month, just to keep the same four walls. This isn't just a housing story. It's a restructuring of who gets to own a home in Britain at all. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which side of that line you're standing on, and what you need to do before the next letter arrives. And here's the part almost nobody is prepared for. The market isn't collapsing everywhere. It's collapsing selectively, targeting specific postcodes, specific homeowners, and specific age groups with surgical precision. If you're under 45, you're carrying most of the UK's mortgage debt. Every rate hike hits like a body blow. Meanwhile, millions of older homeowners sit on fully paid-off properties, untouched, insulated, watching from the sidelines as the next generation gets squeezed out. And that pressure is building fast. In London, supply is up double digits. Transactions? Down nearly a third. A standoff, thousands of sellers waiting for buyers who no longer exist at the prices they want. And when a market hits standoff mode, there's only one direction left for prices to move: down. But up north, it's a different movie entirely. Homes under offer in a week, rental demand exploding, investors quietly circling the Midlands and Scotland, snapping up anything with a half-decent yield before the public even realizes what's happening. Two markets, one country, a divide that's widening with every rate decision, every listing, every desperate price cut. And whether you're a homeowner, a renter, or an investor, you're about to find out exactly what that divide means for you. The split you just heard about, north rising, south sinking, didn't happen overnight. It started quietly, in the numbers, in the places most people never look. Because behind every for sale board that never comes down, behind every price cut buried on page 2 of a Rightmove listing, there's a signal, a warning, a crack in the system widening faster than anyone wants to admit. Over the past year, something extraordinary happened. Transactions across the UK collapsed, not dipped. Collapsed. In some months, activity fell by more than 30% year on year, entire regions where the market simply froze. No buyers, no movement, just tension building in silence, like a spring pulled tighter and tighter. And while buyers vanished, sellers didn't, especially in the south. In London, supply surged, tens of thousands of homeowners listing their properties, hoping they could get out before the real downturn arrived. But the buyers never came. Those who did come made one thing brutally clear. They weren't paying 2021 prices for 2025 problems. So the game changed. Sellers started cutting, £10,000 off, then £15,000, then £25,000. Quiet reductions, hidden in updated listing tags, desperate attempts to chase a market slipping away. Meanwhile, 300 miles north, it looked like a different country. Homes in Manchester, Leeds, Liverpool gone in under a week. Multiple offers, crowded viewings. First-time buyers outbidding each other for homes that would have sat untouched 5 years ago. Prices rising 7 to 8% year on year, defying the national narrative. This is the moment the public finally noticed. The UK no longer has a housing market. It has two. And the divide isn't cultural, it's mathematical. In the South, a typical mortgage means borrowing £350,000, £450,000. At today's rates, that's a financial chokehold. In the North, the same house costs £160,000, £200,000. The mortgage is manageable. Rentals cash flow. Yields make sense again. Investors spot opportunity. And families can breathe. This is why the South is slowing, but the North is accelerating. Not because of vibes, lifestyle, or where people want to live. Because the math finally broke and the regions with healthier numbers are pulling ahead while the rest stalls. And this divergence is only the first stage. Because what comes next isn't just a regional split. It's the mortgage reset, the landlord exodus, and the generational squeeze all converging at the exact same time. And that convergence is where the real story begins. But even as the numbers shifted, something strange happened. People refused to believe it. Estate agents kept smiling. Developers kept promising. Politicians kept repeating the same line. The market is stable, the fundamentals are sound. And millions of homeowners clung to those words like a life raft in rising water. This wasn't optimism. This was denial. Because while London listings piled up and price cuts spread quietly across the southeast, the official narrative stayed frozen in a different reality. Show homes gleamed, banners screamed, 5% deposit, and free legal fees. And glossy brochures insisted that demand was still incredibly strong. Their dat. But if demand was so strong, why were developers offering incentives they hadn't touched since 2009? Why were homes in once untouchable suburbs sitting on Rightmove for 90, 120, 180 days with no offers? Why were sellers whispering to agents, "Just bring me any buyer"? Behind the marketing, a darker truth sat in plain sight. The new build premium had broken the system. For nearly a decade, Help to Buy didn't just help buyers. It inflated prices. Developers knew they had a captive audience, thousands of first-time buyers who had to buy new builds to access the scheme. So they priced them 10%, sometimes 15% above equivalent resale homes. No competition, no pressure, no reality check. And buyers walked straight into the trap because it didn't feel like overpaying. It felt like winning. Until 2025, when they tried to remortgage and discovered their shiny £250,000 flat was worth £230,000. 7 years of payments. Less equity than day one. Negative value disguised behind fresh paint and staged furniture. But the denial didn't end with developers. Politicians joined the chorus. For months, they reassured the public that house prices were holding firm. Technically true because the market was so frozen, there weren't enough sales to move the averages. Not rising, not falling, just stuck. A stalemate masquerading as stability. Meanwhile, in living rooms across the UK, millions clung to those headlines. Prices steady, market resilient, soft landing. Because believing the truth that the era of cheap borrowing was over, that the South was over-leveraged, that affordability had snapped in half, was too painful. Reality meant consequences. Reality meant change. Reality meant admitting their home wasn't a guaranteed winning lottery ticket anymore. But markets don't care about feelings. They move with math. And the math was turning cruel. The price gap between North and South wasn't a shift. It was a warning. A signal flashing red through spreadsheets, transactions, and mortgage statements. A signal millions ignored because denial is easier than adjustment, and hope is cheaper than a rate reset. But that denial was about to collide with something far bigger, far harder, and far more unforgiving. The mortgage cliff. And when it hits, the market stops caring who believed the warnings and who didn't. The mortgage cliff didn't appear out of nowhere. It was engineered slowly, quietly, mathematically, over 10 years of cheap money that rewired the entire market. For a decade, borrowing felt almost free. 2%, sometimes less. People got used to it, built their budgets around it, stretched further than they ever would have dared in a normal economy. London families took on £400,000 mortgages, not because they were reckless, but because the system told them it was safe. But when interest rates surged, the illusion shattered. Here's the raw math the math no marketing slogan can erase. A £250,000 mortgage at 2% costs roughly £1,120 a month. Manageable. Predictable. A number you can build a life around. Roll that same mortgage onto 5%, the reality facing hundreds of thousands today, and your payment jumps to £1,460. Same house, same salary, same life. £340 more evaporating every month. At 6% or 7%, it becomes catastrophic. This is the real reason the South is cracking. It's not buyer sentiment. It's not market psychology. It's math crushing people in slow motion. Because a £400,000 mortgage at today's rates isn't a financial commitment. It's a chokehold. But in the North and Midlands, the math still works. A £180,000 home in Leeds. A 200 sterline semi in Liverpool. Even at 5%, the payments land in the realm of reality, and investors know it. Rental yields hold up. Cash flow still breathes. First-time buyers can actually see daylight. That's why the regional divide isn't a cultural shift. It's a numerical correction, the market punishing areas where borrowing became detached from wages. And speaking of wages, they're part of the root cause too. House prices grew 50-70% in a decade. Wages? T-% at best. The gap widened until something had to snap, and interest rates were the blade that finally cut the rope. Then there's the piece almost nobody talks about. Population movement. The pandemic didn't just change remote work culture. It drained the South's demand. Thousands left London for Manchester, Bristol, Birmingham, chasing cheaper mortgages, shorter commutes, and higher quality of life. The moment they left, a silent chain reaction began. Less demand in the South, falling prices, more listings, more pressure on mortgages, more forced sales. More demand in the North, faster transactions, rising prices, stronger rental markets, investors piling in. One system unwinding, another accelerating. And at the center of it all, the fixed-rate time bomb ticks towards zero because by 2027, nearly 800,000 homeowners will be forced into a rate they cannot afford. This isn't sentiment. This isn't fear. This isn't speculation. This is arithmetic tightening around the country's biggest asset class. And when arithmetic turns, the market follows. Next, we look at the chain reaction this triggers not just for homeowners, but for renters, landlords, and entire cities. When the math breaks, the market doesn't collapse in one clean moment. It unravels, silently, in slow, brutal dominoes. And the first domino to fall wasn't homeowners. It was landlords. For years, landlords carried the rental market expanding portfolios, snapping up cheap credit, soaking up demand from tenants who couldn't compete with rising prices. But the same interest rate spike that crushed homeowners hit them just as hard, and often harder. Because landlords don't borrow at residential rates. They borrow at higher buy-to-let rates, with stricter stress tests, tighter margins, and less sympathy from lenders. When rates doubled, then tripled, the math stopped working overnight. Rents couldn't rise fast enough to cover the extra £300, £400, £500 a month in interest. Regulations tightened. Tax perks vanished. And suddenly, the business model broke. That's why last year, 19% of landlords sold, while only 8% bought. That's why 41% now say they plan to exit or shrink their portfolios. This isn't a trend. It's an exodus. And that exodus triggers a chain reaction across the entire housing ecosystem. First domino, rental supply shrinks. Fewer rental homes. More people chasing the same listings. Rents climb not gradually, but aggressively, especially in cities like Bristol, Manchester, and Glasgow. Second domino, former rental homes hit the sales market. Thousands of ex-landlord properties flooding Rightmove and Zoopla clean homes, decent locations, priced to move quickly. These weren't available 2 years ago. Now they're everywhere. Third domino, prices weaken in oversupplied regions. More listings. Fewer buyers. Negotiation power shifts for the first time in a decade. A £300,000 home quietly slides to £285,000. Then £280,000. As sellers realize the market doesn't care what their neighbor sold for in 2021. Fourth domino, younger homeowners get trapped. They bought at the peak with 2% deals, stretched thin even then. Now their fixed rate expires, and suddenly they're staring at 5%, 6%, even 7%, hundreds of pounds more each month with wages that never caught up. Some try to hold on. Most can't. They list their homes. More supply hits the market. Prices sink further. Fifth domino, the generational gap explodes. Over 65 seconds, owning outright, watch the chaos from a safe distance. Under 45 seconds, take the full force of every rate rise. One group insulated, one group bleeding, a divide widening in real time. And at the center of all these dominoes stands one unavoidable truth. When landlords exit, homeowners struggle, renters panic, and buyers retreat. The market doesn't crash like a falling building. It cracks like ice slowly, unpredictably, and in every direction at once. But the next stage is even more brutal. Because there's one solution, the system keeps selling. One fix, developers, politicians, and lenders insist will save the market. Except it won't. It will make things worse. And that illusion is what we confront. Here's the cruelest twist in the entire housing story. When a system starts breaking, the first things to appear aren't real solutions. They're illusions, designed to calm people, designed to delay panic, designed to make collapsing numbers look like temporary inconveniences. And in 2025, the UK housing market is drowning in illusions. Developers were the first to deploy them. 5% deposit contribution, free legal fees, cashback on completion, bright banners, smiling couples, perfect kitchens with bowls of fake lemons. But behind the marketing, the numbers don't change. These incentives aren't gifts. They're camouflage. Because the discount you think you're receiving has already been baked into a higher asking price, the same inflated new build premium that pushed entire cohorts of help-to-buy buyers into negative equity. Developers didn't reduce prices. They repackaged them. Then came the political illusions. Soft press releases, optimistic speeches, lines crafted to soothe rather than inform. The market is stabilizing. A soft landing is expected. Affordability will improve as rates ease. But stabilizing for who? Soft landing for which region? Affordability for which income bracket? Because for a family rolling off a 2% mortgage into 6%, stability is irrelevant. Survival is the real question. And while homeowners waited for that promised rate relief, another illusion spread. The belief that lower interest rates would magically fix everything. But lower rates won't fix the equity traps. They won't erase the overpricing of the past decade. They won't reverse the landlord exodus, the rental shortage, or the north-south divergence. They won't change the fact that in vast parts of the South, the price-to-income ratio has become mathematically impossible. Rates may come down eventually, but the structural damage is already done. Then there's the most dangerous illusion of all, the idea that demand will always return. Demand doesn't return automatically. It returns only when prices, wages, borrowing costs, and confidence align. Right now, all four are moving in opposite directions. Developers pretend incentives will revive the market. Politicians pretend optimism will calm voters. Agents pretend price cuts don't mean anything. Lenders pretend borrowers can adjust. These aren't solutions. They're stall tactics. And every stall tactic delays the correction, making it sharper when it finally hits. Because when illusions fade, reality rushes in. And reality is preparing a deeper, more destructive shift, one built not on psychology or sentiment, but on forces that reshape societies. Generational debt, demographic pressure, and the concentration of ownership. That fault line is next. The illusions fade. But the fault lines remain deep, silent, and far more permanent than any interest rate cycle. Because what's happening in the UK housing market isn't just a price correction. It's a redistribution of who gets to own property at all. And the fracture runs along three brutal, unavoidable lines: age, geography, and ownership type. Start with age, the quietest, yet most powerful divide. If you're over 65, there's a 61% chance you own your home outright. No mortgage, no rate shock, no lender quietly emailing you a new payment that feels like a second rent. You sit on decades of equity, shielded from the turmoil, insulated from the chaos. But if you're under 45, you're carrying the burden of the entire system. You bought at peak prices. You stretched to meet affordability tests that barely made sense, even at 2%. Now the reset hits you first, hardest, and longest. One generation floats. One generation drowns. Same country, same market. Two realities separated by timing, nothing more. The second fault line is geographic. London and the Southeast once carried the nation's property wealth, the safe bet, the untouchable asset class. But today, those regions are the most exposed. High loans, high prices, high expectations, and the exact areas where rising rates destroy affordability the fastest. Meanwhile, the North, Midlands, and parts of Scotland are becoming the new engines of ownership. Lower debt, higher yields, faster transactions. It's not a cultural shift, it's the simple arithmetic of survival. The third fault line is the most dangerous, the concentration of ownership. For decades, home ownership was broad. Millions owned one home. A few owned two, some owned three. But today, the distribution is breaking. Professional investors, the ones who planned for rate rises, built buffers, and kept cash ready, are quietly buying up the homes casual landlords are dumping. Institutional funds are circling regional markets once considered too small to matter. Inheritance is becoming the single biggest factor in who gets on the ladder at all. This is how societies split, not through riots, recessions, or elections, but through assets changing hands silently from the stretched to the resilient, from the young to the old, from the individual to the institutional. And as these fault lines deepen, something else begins to emerge. A new kind of player, not emotional sellers or panicked owners, but calculated buyers, investors, with strategies built for chaos. They're not scared of the downturn. They're preparing to profit from it. When a market fractures, most people freeze. They wait. They hope. They pray that prices recover, that rates fall, that the world returns to the version they understood. But not everyone waits, because in every housing downturn, there is a small group, invisible, silent, razor-focused, who step forward exactly when everyone else steps back. These are not accidental landlords, not overstretched homeowners, not buyers who fall in love with granite countertops and staged lighting. These are opportunists, predators, if you want the honest word. People who treat chaos like oxygen. And right now, they're everywhere. While casual landlords are exiting in panic, professional investors are quietly taking their place, sweeping up discounted stock in the Midlands, Liverpool, Leeds, Glasgow. They're not emotional, they're numerical. They see a two-bed flat in Liverpool at £120,000, renting for £800 a month, and they don't hesitate. That's a gross yield, pushing 8%. Even after maintenance, voids, and management fees, the deal still breathes. Meanwhile, in London, a £400,000 flat renting for £1,800 barely hits 5% gross and collapses to 3% net after costs. To them, the South isn't a market. It's a museum piece. Pretty to look at, terrible to buy. And then there are the institutional players' funds, corporate landlords, private equity arms groups who don't care about carpets or school catchments. They care about yield curves, debt terms, and distressed sellers. When transactions freeze and homeowners panic, these groups see opportunity. When landlords dump properties to escape rising rates, these groups bulk buy entire portfolios overnight. When prices diverge by region, they redirect capital like surgeons, cutting failing markets, feeding thriving ones. The public sees uncertainty. They see entry points. Because the truth is simple. Markets don't reward the fastest. They reward the calmest. And nothing creates opportunity like fear. But here's the twist. These opportunists aren't just buying. They're reshaping the future of ownership itself. Every home they acquire is a home that won't return to the market for a generation. Every discounted purchase locks in an advantage younger buyers can't compete with. Every landlord forced to sell becomes one more asset absorbed into concentrated hands. This is how housing systems shift, not with booms and crashes, but with quiet transfers of power during moments of paralysis. And while the opportunists position themselves for the next cycle, millions of ordinary homeowners, renters, and first-time buyers are still waiting for clarity, waiting for a sign that the market is turning, waiting for someone to say, it's safe to move again. But the market doesn't send invitations. It sends signals, and those signals are pointing toward the final, most decisive fork in the path. The point where every viewer must decide what role they play in what comes next. Because the market isn't just shifting, it's choosing winners and losers. And now, after all the numbers, after the fractures, the illusions, the exodus, the predators, we arrive at the place every housing cycle eventually leads. A crossroads. Not for the market, for you, because the truth is brutally simple. The UK housing market is no longer one single ecosystem you can wait out. It's a patchwork of winners and losers, of regions rising and regions declining, of people positioned for the next decade and people hoping the last decade somehow returns. So where you stand right now matters more than it has in 20 years. If you're a homeowner rolling off a fixed rate in the next 12-24 months, this is your reality. Your mortgage won't reset gently. It won't ease back down to 2% or 3%. It will land at 5% or higher, and the market will not wait for you to adjust. Your task isn't to hope, it's to plan. Talk to a broker now, not when the letter arrives. Run stress tests at 6% and 7%. Calculate, not guess. And if the math breaks, sell on your terms, not the lender's. If you're a renter, your crossroads is different. The landlord exodus is shrinking supply. Rents will not ease in the short term, but something else is happening, quietly, beneath the panic. Ex-landlord homes are entering the sales market, and for the first time in years, you have leverage. Fewer buyers, more listings. Sellers accepting offers they would have laughed at in 2021. Your decision isn't rent or buy, it's rent and negotiate. Because the window where renters become owners at a discount is opening, and like every window in property, it won't stay open long. If you're a landlord, the crossroads is sharper. This is the moment to decide whether you're a professional or an accidental bystander caught in a new regulatory world. If you can't absorb higher rates, licensing rules, and tax changes, the market is telling you the truth. Exit. Take the equity. Walk away clean. But if your numbers work even at 5% or 6%, if your yields are strong, if your properties are in the North, Midlands, Scotland, then you are standing on the starting line of the next cycle, not the end of the last one. And if you're an investor, the message is the coldest of all. This is your moment. The predators are already here, but the field is still wide open. Distressed sellers, negative equity new builds, portfolio dumps from burned-out landlords, motivated owners staring down remortgage letters they can't afford. The chaos everyone else fears is the clarity you've been waiting for. But no matter who you are, homeowner, renter, landlord, investor, the same truth echoes across the entire country. The UK housing market of 2010-2020 is gone. Cheap credit is gone. Automatic capital gains are gone. The idea that property always wins is gone. What's coming next is a market that rewards discipline over emotion, numbers over narratives, prepared buyers over reckless borrowers, regions where the math works over regions where it never did. A market shaped not by who hopes the hardest, but by who understands the signals, because the signals are speaking loudly now. Prices falling in the south, prices rising in the north, landlords exiting, predators entering, transactions freezing, mortgages resetting. This isn't random. This isn't noise. This is direction. And at this crossroads, you get to choose. Do you move with the direction, or wait until it moves without you?